In ancient Rome, marriage was not the beginning of love. It was the beginning of obedience. A father would celebrate his daughter's wedding, knowing that before she belonged to her husband, she would be taken somewhere else first, somewhere beneath temples, somewhere history tried not to describe. There, in chambers carved under sacred stone, priests performed a ritual they called purification, a ceremony so disturbing that Rome buried its records, sealed its rooms, and silenced the women who survived it. But ruins remember what empires try to forget. Archaeologists uncovered hidden beds beneath temples, walls carved with brides' names, and inscriptions that were never meant to be seen. This is not mythology. This is documented ritual. And tonight, we uncover the horrifying ceremony Rome tried to erase from history.
Kings were killed, queens were broken, but some stories refuse to die. If you crave real dark history, like, subscribe, and don't look away.
The wedding night Rome feared. A marriage feast was still echoing through the marble halls when the music began to fade. Not because the celebration had ended, but because something else was about to begin. In Rome, a bride did not belong to her husband first. She belonged to the gods. And on this night, a 16-year-old girl would learn what that truly meant. The torches burned low as the guests drank and laughed, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the final ritual waiting beyond the temple gates. The father stood among senators and merchants, accepting congratulations, his smile disciplined, his posture proud, yet his eyes betrayed a tension he could not hide. He had arranged a powerful alliance, secured his family's future, and honored every law of Rome. Still, beneath the pride lived a quieter truth. He knew where his daughter was being taken, and he knew he had no authority to stop it. She had been prepared for marriage since childhood, educated, veiled, perfumed, constructed in obedience and grace. But no tutor had explained the part that came after the feast. When the elder women approached her, widows and matrons chosen by the temple, their faces carried neither warmth nor cruelty, only ritual duty. They spoke gently, but they did not ask permission. They never asked permission. Escorted through torch-lit streets, the bride walked barefoot toward the temple of the good goddess, her white garments glowing against the night. Citizens stepped aside in silence. Some bowed their heads in reverence. Others refused to look at her at all. It was considered sacred, and yet no one wished to witness it. Inside the temple, incense smothered the air, thick enough to blur thought. Priestly chants echoed against stone columns as attendants removed her wedding jewelry, one piece at a time, placing each item into bronze bowls like offerings. She realized then, with growing dread, that she was being prepared not as a wife, but as a sacrifice of purity. They led her beyond the public sanctuary, toward a narrow passage carved into the earth beneath the temple foundation. The sounds of celebration above faded with each descending step, replaced by the hollow breath of underground air. The corridor walls were cold, marked by faded carvings she could not fully see. Some looked like names. Others looked like prayers crouched in desperation rather than devotion. At the bottom stood a single wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. It was not ceremonial. It was functional, built to contain, not to honor. Her attendants stopped there. One of the older women adjusted the bride's veil, her hands trembling for the first time. Their eyes met briefly, and in that glance lived generations of shared silence. This was not blessing. This was inheritance. The door opened from within. Torchlight revealed a stone chamber, a bed carved from the floor itself, channels etched into the marble, bronze instruments arranged with ritual precision. Figures waited in ceremonial robes, their faces shadowed, their authority unquestioned. Priests, guardians of divine will, men the law declared untouchable. The bride hesitated. Behind her, the attendants stepped back. The door closed. And then, the sound that echoed through Roman history but was never written in its records, the lock turning from the outside. The chamber beneath the temple centuries later. When Rome's temples had collapsed into ruins, historians believed the darkest secrets had already turned to dust. But beneath sacred stone, something waited untouched. When archaeologists broke through the sealed floor of the temple, they did not find relics of worship. They found evidence of something far more human and far more horrifying. The excavation began as a routine structural survey beneath an ancient fertility shrine on Aventine Hill, a site long associated with priestesses and ceremonial rites. The team expected burial urns, sacrificial altars, perhaps storage vaults for temple offerings. Instead, their tools struck a hollow echo beneath the marble foundation. A concealed stairwell emerged, narrow, deliberately hidden, descending into darkness that had not been disturbed for nearly 2,000 years. The air below was dry, preserved, untouched by time, as if the earth itself had been ordered to keep Rome's secret intact. When the chamber was opened, silence fell across the excavation team. This was not a crypt, not a treasury. The room was functional, engineered with unsettling precision. At its center stood a stone platform shaped unmistakably like a bed, its surface worn smooth by repeated use rather than ceremonial placement. Along the floor ran carved channels, shallow but deliberate, sloping toward a drainage basin cut into the corner. Archaeologists first assumed liquid offerings, ritual wine, or animal sacrifice. That assumption did not survive long. Iron rings were embedded into the surrounding stone. Not decorative, restrictive. The door itself told another story. Its locking mechanism functioned only from the outside. As dust was cleared from the walls, the true horror began to surface. Inscriptions, hundreds of them, carved at varying heights, some neat and formal, others jagged as if scratched in haste or fear. Names, all female, each followed by a date. When researchers cross-referenced temple festival records and preserved marriage contracts from Roman archives, the alignment was undeniable. These were brides. Documented wedding nights above, documented presences below. No prayers accompanied the names, no blessings, only identity and existence. One inscription drew particular attention. Unlike the others, it included a second line carved deeper, more violently, as though the writer feared it might be erased. I entered pure, I leave broken. The translation sent a chill through the research logs. Academic reports softened the language, calling the chamber a marital purification facility. But privately, several archaeologists described it differently in correspondence. A ritual site where religious authority intersected with physical domination under the protection of law. Further analysis of residue within the drainage channels revealed biological traces inconsistent with animal sacrifice. The findings were never formally published in full detail. Portions of the report were redacted before public release, classified under preservation sensitivity protocols, a modern echo of ancient silence. Torches were reconstructed within the chamber for visualization studies, casting flickering shadows across the carved names. Under that firelight, the room felt less archaeological, more immediate, as if the walls still remembered the voices that had never been allowed to speak. And then came the final discovery. Behind the stone platform, partially concealed by mineral deposits, lay a narrow secondary carving, smaller, almost hidden. It recorded a sequence of tally marks, dozens of them, grouped by ceremonial cycles. At the bottom, one final message etched in fractured Latin. The gods did not ask for this. The priests did. The chamber had preserved more than structure. It had preserved accusation. The law that silenced them, Rome did not hide the ritual in darkness alone. It hid it in law. What violence could not survive by force, it protected with sacred words. And once something is written into law, it no longer looks like a crime. It looks like tradition. The foundation of Roman marriage was authority. A daughter lived under her father's power, and when she married, that authority transferred to her husband in a legal shift called manus. It sounded orderly, dignified, structured. But buried inside early legal codes was a clause rarely explained and almost never debated. Before a marriage could be recognized as valid, the bride required purification by guardians of divine will. The wording appeared harmless, even pious. Purification suggested cleansing, blessing, divine preparation. No legal text described what purification involved. It did not need to. Everyone already knew. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest surviving law code, included language that required proper religious compliance before marriage rites were complete. Later interpretations by legal scholars repeated the phrase without commentary, as though repetition itself erased the need for explanation. The state did not describe the ritual because describing it would invite scrutiny. Instead, it wrapped the act in theology. Religion in Rome was transactional. Offerings were made, blessings were received. In the case of marriage, the offering was not grain, wine, or cattle. It was the bride herself. What made the system impenetrable was not secrecy alone. It was enforcement. Women who revealed sacred rites faced prosecution under laws governing impiety. Impiety was not a minor offense. It was a charge that could destroy a family's status, property, and future. A bride who spoke openly risked exile or execution, but more devastating was the shame placed upon her household. To accuse the ritual was to accuse the gods. To accuse the gods was to accuse Rome. Roman historians, almost exclusively male, wrote extensively about military victories, political reforms, and heroic sacrifices. They recorded detailed accounts of temple construction and priestly ceremonies. Yet when marriage purification appeared, the tone shifted. The descriptions became vague, symbolic, conveniently incomplete. Silence entered the record like a deliberate pause. That pause was not absence of evidence. It was controlled omission. Philosophers occasionally hinted at discomfort. One surviving manuscript from a later copyist contains a passage attributed to a Roman thinker who described sacred rites that injure innocence under the name of devotion. The line was scratched out in ink by a medieval hand, only partially recoverable under modern light analysis. Even centuries later, someone felt the need to suppress it again. The genius of the system was its insulation. A father could claim obedience to law. A husband could claim ignorance. A priest could claim divine mandate. Each participant was shielded by structure. No single person appeared responsible because responsibility dissolved into tradition. But silence is never perfect. In private letters discovered in a provincial archive, a Roman magistrate once complained about excessive zeal among temple officials, causing unrest among certain families. The letter ended abruptly. No follow-up survives. Whether the unrest was suppressed or negotiated is unknown. What is known is this: the ritual endured not because it was hidden, but because it was normalized. It did not need secrecy when it possessed legitimacy. And legitimacy is far more dangerous than darkness. The veil that hid the truth for centuries, historians believed the Roman bridal veil symbolized modesty. They said it represented purity, obedience, virtue. But sometimes cloth is not meant to protect innocence. Sometimes it is meant to hide what was done to it. On the night of her return from the temple, the bride did not re-enter the celebration as the same girl who had left it. The feast would be quieter now, more ceremonial, the guests waiting for the final act of marriage to be completed. Roman custom required the bride to appear veiled in a flame-colored covering called the flamium. It was thick, opaque, deliberately concealing. The husband was forbidden from removing it during the first moments of union. Scholars once described this as ritual modesty, an aesthetic symbol of transition from girlhood to wifehood. But ancient medical texts suggest another purpose entirely. A second-century physician, writing in a clinical treatise about women's health, advised husbands to proceed with caution on wedding nights because brides often displayed signs of prior straying. He noted swelling, bruising, and physical distress inconsistent with a typical first union. His language was careful, restrained, as though he understood the danger of saying too much. He recommended patience, silence, and avoidance of inappropriate inquiry into temple preparation. The phrase appears only once in surviving manuscripts, yet it is enough. Temple preparation was not spiritual cleansing. It left evidence. The veil ensured that evidence would not be seen immediately. The husband, instructed by tradition, would consummate the marriage without lifting it fully. In dim candlelight, under layers of fabric, questions were easier to suppress. If the bride trembled, that was expected. If she winced, that was natural fear. If she wept, it was modesty. Rome had constructed a narrative that explained away trauma before it could be recognized as trauma. Even the architecture of Roman homes reflected this choreography of concealment. The bridal chamber was often positioned away from central courtyards, insulated from witnesses. Female attendants prepared the bride beforehand, applying oils and perfumes thick enough to mask more than scent. The ritual of lifting her over the threshold, long interpreted as symbolic protection from evil spirits, may have served another function entirely. A bride unable to walk steadily would not appear publicly unstable if she was carried. What makes this discovery especially chilling is not merely the violence implied, but the coordination required to maintain illusion. Fathers, priests, physicians, and husbands participated in a system that depended on collective